Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 160 in the series. This one is Working with Wool. We are going to talk about working with wool in many different ways on this episode. We've got a sweater on the needles, we have a homemade drum carder and carding up some wool. I have needle felting, wet felting. It's wool. It's all wool all the time. So welcome back to the yarn room. It's lovely to see all of you. If you're new to the podcast, this is a podcast mostly about garment knitting, garment design, modifications, things like that. But as those of you who are coming back know, I will do just about anything with wool. So we're going to talk about that today mostly. I do have the Copenhagen Cardigan over here by PetiteKnit. We'll start with that. And I have the homemade drum carder that Spencer made me probably about 8 years ago. So we'll talk about that. There are plans for it over on Etsy. So if you want to make your own drum carder, you don't want to spend a lot of money on the massive drum carders out there, you can make your own. It's pretty cool. And we're going to do some needle felting, wet felting. I'm making a dragon right now. I don't start small. This is something you all know about me if you've been watching for a while, and welcome back if you are watching. Coming back to the podcast is nice to see all of you. I don't start small. So when I started knitting, I started with entrelac. There were no knits and purls for me. It was like, let's pick up stitches and make shapes, right? When I started needle felting, I did make one tiny little creature, the raccoon creature that I showed you all on an earlier episode. I'm on to dragons. I'm on to dragons that are yay big with foldable wings and stuff at this point. So I just can't bring myself to start with the small stuff. So maybe you're like that too, and I'd love to know it. And then last but not least, today we are going to do a giveaway, yarn giveaway from Pict Wool. So hang on for that at the very end. So much stuff, so much wool today. I usually tell you where to find me, just in case anyone is new. You can find me as Knitting the Stash just about everywhere. So here on YouTube, over on Instagram, Ravelry, it's all the same name. And then on the main website, which is knittingthestash.com, that is where you can find online classes with me about garment design and modification. And it's also where you can find the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, where I feature independent small batch yarns from around the country. So a lot going on over on knittingthestash.com. You're welcome to join me there. So let's jump right in with this sweater. This is the Copenhagen Cardigan by PetiteKnit. And I just actually finished two sweaters, the same sweater twice, from PetiteKnit for both Spencer and Phineas. And I knit a PetiteKnit sweater for both of them. I think it was the Northland. Yeah, it was Northland, the Northland pullover for both of them. And I'll put pictures in here so you can see it. Two different colors, slightly two different sizes. I was working with a New Zealand yarn and I was totally out of gauge. And so I was mucking about in the sweater world. If you're interested in any of those details, you can flip back a couple of episodes and check out my Northland sweaters, 1 and 2 for men. Both PetiteKnit sweaters. Really liked her pattern from working with those sweaters, and wanted to try a pattern for a cardigan from her. So she has a lot of really adorable, interesting, kind of like wardrobe staples if you're not familiar with PetiteKnit, but a lot of people are familiar with PetiteKnit. She's out of Denmark, if I'm remembering right, and just does some really nice, like basic wardrobe staple kind of things that are very wearable and cool. So this is one of her kind of simple cardigans. I'll spin her around so you can see. I often show you all knits in progress, at least one episode anymore, because I know you like to see how things are working out and how they start before they finish. It's a little bit more fun that way to see them on the needles. Yeah, I dropped a stitch. Dropped a stitch back here, and luckily this is a very woolly wool. It is lichen and lace, which is one of my favorites. I knit a lot of sweaters in lichen and lace. It's a single ply yarn. Talked about this before on the podcast. Totally great for sweaters. A lot of people worry that it's going to bias or something. Not a problem. I have like 3-4 sweaters out of it now. Love it. Different colors, and I like Megan's dyeing and her choice of natural blends. So this is one of the natural blends. I believe it's called Ash, meant to be kind of a gray. But what's interesting is it's blended in this sweater with a mohair, and I think she originally used like Isager yarn and Isager mohair, which is slightly expensive. So some of us went stash diving instead and found cheaper mohair silk. And this is the Southampton Valley Yarns. We were just talking about this on the Zoom yesterday. And somebody else pulled out their ball of Southampton Valley Yarns mohair. We were both using it at the same time. It's a great mohair option. It's a kid mohair mulberry silk, and while we both agreed it's not like the top of the line mohair silk, it's perfectly fine, especially if you're going to blend it with something else or hold it together with something else. Relatively inexpensive. This one comes in 25-gram little balls, so you can, if you're doing different colors, things like that, it's easy to get the right amounts. And I've knit a shawl with this, and then I think this is the first sweater I'm using it for. I love it. It has all the good properties of mohair. It's strong, it's fuzzy, it's warm, it has a little bit of a luster, sheen to it, so I'd highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for, I'm not going to call it a budget mohair, but I'm going to call it like a less expensive mohair for sure. Really like that one. But because this online, it looked a little more gray, it's actually a little blue. It's like a slatey blue. So once I held the two, this is the perils of online yarn shopping. I know them well, right? As many of us do, especially after the pandemic. So when I put them together, you end up with this slatey kind of bluey gray kind of color. I absolutely love it. It's not what I planned. What I planned was a much more gray kind of neutral cardigan, but I'm digging this color, and I think it kind of like, it works for me. When I put the sweater on to try it on, like this color works for my coloring or my hair, eye, whatever it is, that whole thing where you're like, are you a cool or a warm? Are you a summer or a winter or whatever? You hold up different pieces of colored cloth to kind of see which one makes you look good in terms of like, does it wash you out? Does it make you look like you have bags under your eyes? Check it out. There are some really cool videos about it on YouTube. I've never really done it except when I make sweaters. I'm like, oh, that one looks good. That one doesn't. So this color looks good. I'm happy with it. I did drop a stitch. But back to that, since it is a very woolly wool and a mohair held together, if you've ever knit with mohair, you know that it's pretty much impossible to take it out. If you need to tink back or pull it out, it is quite a job. I have heard from a few people that if you really need to rip out mohair, the best thing you can do is put your sweater or whatever it is in the freezer for a little while, and then pull it out, rip as much as you can, and then put it back in the freezer. It's kind of like pie crust or something, right? Where it needs to just set up a little bit, and then you can pull it apart more easily. I've not tried this, but I've had friends who've said this is the way to do mohair if you have to rip it out. I'm not ripping any mohair if I can help it. So I dropped a stitch up here. I think I was all the way down here when I noticed it, and it just sat there. So for those of you who are new to knitting, or you're knitting sweaters, or you're knitting things with wool yarn and you're worried, I remember knitting my first sweater and thinking, oh, if I drop a stitch, what's going to happen? If you're knitting with a woolly wool, it's just going to sit there. Like this sat there as I was like knitting, turning, pushing it in the bag, all the things for a very long time, and it just sat there. So once I noticed it, I grabbed it with a stitch marker, and after the sweater's done, I guess I could do it now, but I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to grab it with a piece of yarn, pull it back over the next row, a little bit, like lock it in there, and then just lock it in the back. It'll be fine. Nobody will notice. And it didn't, one stitch didn't mess up my stitch counts. Though I was wondering when I got to the bottom here and I was doing my division for the sleeves and I was counting along the back, I was like, why do I have an odd number? It's kind of weird. I thought I was supposed to have an even number. There you go. Now you know. So this is a very classic kind of raglan. We've talked about compound raglans on here before, and I do love a good compound raglan. This is not quite that, but it's also not one of those raglans. We were talking about this on Zoom yesterday too. It's not one of the raglans that starts kind of up here right at your collarbones and goes down like some of those, like a old-fashioned baseball jersey, right? So that's like a very classic. Am I going the right way? I always get the wrong way when I do this. I think it's this way, right? Anyway, it's a little bit, it's spaced a little bit more, it has a little bit more of a flattering shape to it. So the raglan is out here. It is just raglan increases. So it's not everybody likes that kind of sweater. Some people prefer, I know I prefer the compound raglan, but this one, it seems fine in terms of its spacing. There's also a lot of short rows in the back to kind of lift everything up. And it is a top-down, obviously a top-down sweater. So if you are adjusting things, you have to kind of do it at the beginning, obviously, otherwise you're going to be ripping back and figuring things out. So those are a couple things to think about with this sweater, though I do like the way that it ended up working out, the depth of the yoke. I'm pretty happy with it. I had to add an inch here after the raglan increases. Normally you would time it so that your raglan increases end right above where you split for your sleeves in a lot of patterns. So you can see here I have just an inch of plain knitting, because when I put this on at this point, I tried it all on, split for the sleeves. It was okay, but it was kind of high in the armpit, and that yoke depth, you know, that'll drive you crazy if you're trying, especially trying to put this on over something. Yeah, it's just not gonna work out. So I ended up adding an extra inch there. This is all because, as usual, I'm using completely different yarn. Like I said, completely different gauge. I don't even remember which size I'm knitting. I'm kind of like just, I think I'm on the second size in the pattern, but I'm also like kind of fudging some things as usual. So yeah, I was a little concerned about this sweater because you're knitting the button bands as you're knitting the whole sweater. So one of the issues with that, and somebody mentioned this on a project page about this particular cardigan, is that if you are knitting the button bands as integrated, so over here, these little markers mark my buttonholes, which I've already put in, tiny little buttonholes. If it's not the right, if it's a top-down sweater like this and it's not the right width across the chest, you can get gaping. You can, you know, if you can add your button bands at the end, you can always add a little more. Like these button bands are probably about, what, like 3/4 of an inch maybe? If you added them at the end, you could add an inch and a half. You know, you can modify them pretty nicely, which will allow you to make up for any lack of, you know, circumference in the sweater. So I was a little bit nervous about that. This does work well, especially once I steam it, it will relax. It's kind of like bunched up on the needles right now. It does relax. It is going to be not a fitted cardigan, but it is going to sit like one of those, what did you call those in the 50s? The sets, the little cardigan sweater sets, right? So it's a little bit more like that kind of fit, but I think it'll still be okay because I did try it on, and the buttons, I can overlap the button bands, so it seems okay. We'll see. I'll keep you up. You'll see in the end whether or not that actually worked out. The nice thing about this, I would say, is that because the button bands are very simple, just plain little bit of rib, you could add to them if you needed to. The edge is very nice and finished. It's one of the benefits of, you know, having the integrated button band, but you could pick up stitches and you could add another ½ inch, whatever you wanted to the front in the form of new button bands, or even just bands in the front. And just, you could forget about these holes. Nobody's going to notice them because they're so tiny. So those are a couple of things I was thinking about with this sweater. It seems so far like it's working, so we'll see. The other thing I did modify is the underarms. So the last couple sweaters I've knit, the last one was the surf sweater by Ankestrikt. Yes. And she had the same thing in her pattern, only about an inch worth of stitches added at the underarm. Maybe I'm just old school. I'd love to know what everybody else is doing out there, but everything I read in all my sweater reading research was that for the most part, you want a couple inches down here if you're looking for like a comfortable bit of ease. 1 inch just doesn't seem like enough to me for an underarm. That's not to say that, you know, everybody's different. You might need 3 inches. You might need 4 inches. You know, you might need more. But I think less is usually not what I'd go for an underarm. Even in the smallest size, I tend to feel like you need 1.5 inches, 2 inches at least under the arm. What do you think? I'd love to know. So I added an extra inch underneath the arm. Seems good to me. It's what I've done in like every sweater I knit. I just know that I need 2 inches. And I did a provisional cast on, so that's why there's the string here. So I will pick up all these stitches and just be able to knit the sleeve down. I love the provisional cast on for underarm sleeves because it just leaves a smooth underarm. And if you've been watching this podcast for a long time, you know I love a good armpit. So that is the provisional cast on right here. So I can pick up those stitches. But other than that, I mean, I've pretty much followed the pattern. Is that true? I think I've actually followed a lot of this pattern. It's kind of unusual for me. And the fabric itself, I'm knitting on size 3 needles, so that's US 3, which is, let's see if I can read the tiny print here. Is it 3mm? Where are we? 3.25mm US 3s. And with the yarn held double, you know, the mohair held together with the lichen and lace, it's definitely a dense fabric. It does steam out very well. Like, I've been steaming it as I went to kind of make sure that I was happy with it. So just adding a little steam to the sweater, which loosens everything up, relaxes it, and, you know, then you can see kind of how it's fitting. It's not a full wet block, but it gives you an idea. But it's definitely a dense fabric, but I think that's okay. It felt okay to me, and it feels kind of like it's not going to be a wispy cardigan. It's going to be like a substantial cardigan, which is, I think, structurally not so bad. So that's what I'm going for. So there you go. So this is the Copenhagen Cardigan by PetiteKnits, and I'm hoping, I don't know, it's I'm into these fingering weight yarn sweaters lately, and they take a lot longer than like a DK weight or a worsted weight, as you all know. DK worsted weight you can knit in a couple of weeks if you're dedicated to it. This is taking me, like, it's going to take a month probably at least to get this one done. So yeah, we'll see. But I'm loving it. It's a good sweater. Highly recommend PetiteKnit. I do like her patterns. So there you go. There's my recommendation. All right, let's switch over, make a switch, to talking about wool in another way, which is carding it up, right? For those of you who are spinners or felters or, you know, working with carded wool in one way or another. Let me put my yarn aside here. A few years back, I really wanted to get a drum carder because I was working with a lot of fleece, and Spencer and Steve decided to build a drum carder for me. So I still have one fleece left. I get rid of a lot of my fleece, turned them into yarn and things like that. And so this is the drum carder. Let me slide this out of the way so you can kind of see it. And I will go back here so we can look at it a little bit. So this drum carder is totally homemade, which is really cool. And there's a couple of videos over on Spencer's YouTube if you want to check them out just to see how it was made. There is a plan up on Etsy. So if you're interested in making a drum carder for yourself, you can do it. The plan is up there. And it just takes a little bit of, I mean, a lot of people have made these. We've seen them. They've sent pictures to Spencer like, I made your drum carder, check it out. So it's, a lot of it is just plain basic wood. You get your carding cloth. I think we got ours from Brother. I think that's where we got it. You can just buy sheets of it and then you cut it to fit your drums. The tricky part here is that the drums were made on a CNC router, so you might not have access to that, but there are plenty of other ways to make, the way that we made these is with discs. So you make a bunch of discs, put them together to create the larger drum, and then you attach your carding cloth to it. You know, pieces here that are not wood, metal handles, a little bit of plastic on the spinner, and in the back, I'll spin this around for you. In the back, we have the whole mechanism for the turn, right? And we have just a band on there right now, and you can see at the back there are ways to tighten and loosen and move pieces around for the liquor end and for the main drum. And I'm trying to keep this balanced here so that it doesn't fall over the staircase and kill someone. So the drum carder works like any other drum carder, right? You spin like a classic drum carder, not an electrified one. You know, you spin the main drum, and at the same time that band in the back is going to make the liquor end spin around at a slower pace. The liquor end does have a rougher carding cloth on it, so this is a finer carding cloth. I want to say we kind of set it for medium fleece, if I'm remembering right. Not totally fine fleece, but medium fleece. And then the liquor end has a much rougher carding cloth on it. All this is in the instructions if you're interested. So it works really well. Love this thing. And like I said, I had one fleece left, and I needed some core wool for my new dragon. So this is a CVM Romeldale Perendale fleece that I was gifted by Jennifer Geyer when she was working for Annaroon's sheep company. And Annaroon's is wonderful. Jennifer is wonderful. If you have a chance to interact with any of those woolly people, they're great. And the fleece is gorgeous. I washed this forever ago and did my usual washing of the wool method. So the lock structure is actually pretty well intact. You can see all the locks here. It's a beautiful fleece. It came out really nice and kind of bright white. It has a little bit of VM in it. I'm not too worried about that, especially if I'm going to use it for core wool. I know some of you are looking at me like, why are you not just spinning this right now? And it's true. I could be spinning this, but I have so much other fluff to spin that I thought this is perfect for a core. I only need a little bit of core wool for this dragon. So I carded it up, and that's how I store my fleece, by the way. If I have washed fleece, I'll keep them in pillowcases. It's just that way they're not, there's some air circulation. It's better than plastic. If it's clean fleece, it's less likely to attract bugs. And the pillowcase kind of lets the air come through. So these are the bats. I made 3 bats. I'm going to get fluff all over me. That's what it's all about. So I made 3 bats. They're probably about 4 ounces each. You can make pretty fat bats on that drum carder. And it's like, I don't know if you can see that texture on the camera. It's just so like, oh, it's like, you could use this as a pillow. Like that's what when I put them in the pillowcase, I looked at Spencer and I was like, that would actually be a really comfortable place to sleep. It's so poofy. So I made these 3 bats. I only ran them through the carder twice. So once to create the bat, and then once to run it back through and get a little bit of a finer go. I'm not too worried about having like a perfect bat because, like I said, I'm using this as core wool for wrapping the armature of my dragon. So it's not going to be seen by anyone, and all I need to be able to do is felt with it. And this is going to be great, very feltable wool, lots of crimp. It wants to stick to itself. So it is going to be perfect for the dragon. And I made enough because Spencer is also making a dragon. Wait for that. There will be a future episode in which Spencer and I have felted dragons, and you'll be the first to know. So I have 3 bats worth, which is probably way too much, but it was just so much fun to card up the wool that I just couldn't stop myself. And for anyone who's into carding and also trying to economize, let me show you 2 tools that I use all the time. Okay, so 2 tools that I use all the time would be this. I use a bent knitting needle as a doffer. So if you don't want to buy a doffer, you can't afford one, you just don't want to bother with it, you can take an old straight knitting needle. You want it to be a relatively large gauge needle, and you can bend it. And then I use this to doff the wool. And for those of you who are carders, there's a little split right here in the carder, in the actual carding cloth. And you just use your doffer in there, stick it in, pull it straight up, and break the fiber gently. Cheap way to get a doffer, so I'll say that. And then the other thing I use is this little, I think it's like a dog brush. It's called Olivia Garden, the brush cleaner. I think I got it on like bigboxstore.com. And it has these great little tiny teeth on both sides, perfect for cleaning your drum carder. So like when you're done working with it and you need to go in and clean all the wool off of it, this thing is great. It won't damage your carding cloth, but it gets so much of the wool out of there, especially if you're switching colors. So if you were doing white fleece and you wanted to go to, or if you, I guess it's probably the reverse, if you were doing like a colored fleece or different color, like making rainbows or something, and you wanted to get it out to do a white fleece afterward, this thing is actually really great. Totally kind of like a cheap little tool. I also use a wallpaper brush, literally, for packing down the fiber as I'm carding it. These are all tools that cost very little, or you have them lying around: an old knitting needle, a cheap dog fur brush, and a wallpaper. They're kind of like long, I don't have mine out right now, but it's like wallpaper brushes. They're about yay big. They just have a bunch of bristles, and you just hold it over the top of your drum as you're spinning, and it will compact the fiber down onto your drum. So you can get more on there, especially if you're going for like a 4-ounce bat on a drum that size. It's not always easy to get it all on there. The fancy carders, the ones that you might buy, will often have I can't remember, it's like an arm that comes down and kind of sits on top of the drum and serves the same purpose as the wallpaper brush. It just helps compact the fiber. So we're just basically mimicking that with cheap tools. There you go. So homemade drum carder, cheap tools. You can do this without spending a fortune. It is the best. I love that kind of stuff. When I started out podcasting, one of the things I love doing is talking about and finding different ways to do DIY stuff, like that doesn't cost as much money, and that allows you to have fun doing the things you want to do. So there you go. Okay, I'm checking myself for wool since I was just hanging out with the fleece. Let me show you what we're going to do with that wool. So I have completed the armature for my dragon. It doesn't look like much right now. It has its little fuzzy chenille wrapped around it. So this is obviously the head over here, front feet, back and tail. And you wrap the chenille on here just so that the wool, when you wrap your core wool, will have something to grab onto when you go to felt it all down. It's a pretty interesting armature. If you're going to create a lot of different animals, right, you would probably not this kind of tail, and maybe not this long of a neck, but you know, you got 4 feet, you got a back, a spine, and you know, the possibility of a neck and a head. So it's a pretty cool armature. The class I'm taking is through Living Felt, which is a cool supplier. They're like a small indie business, woman-owned. Totally support them. And the person teaching the class is Joyce Hazelrig. Let me get that right. Hazelrig. Joyce Hazelrig. This is what the dragon will potentially look like if I can manage to make a dragon look like this. And the class is great. It's tons and tons of video. Really, you can slow it all down. You can listen to all the different lessons over and over again. It's just a really great online class for how to make a dragon. And I got Spencer into it. So he helped me felt the wings. I told you we were doing all the wool today. So we did wet felting. These are my dragon wings, which I think are pretty cool. And they have two different sides. So this side has kind of the embellishments built in. The other side's a little more plain. That'll be for the back. So they'll kind of sit on the dragon like this. Cool. And they're totally like collapsible. Like you can collapse them, you can bend them because they have an armature inside them, which I think you can see a little bit of. They have, it's kind of like fingers inside. So when you felt them all spread out so that, you know, they're not going to get collapsed once you shrink the wool around them. Aren't they cool? I love them. And so this is kind of like the harness that's going to sit on the dragon body. So this guy will get some pretty funky wings at some point. And then Spencer got so excited because he actually helped me do the felting. He has like really hot, big hands. So it turns out if you want to felt and you want to get your felt to felt your wool to felt very quickly, find a man with big, hot hands. That's all. He was over there like felting, and I would switch sides, and I'd go over there to like do my, you know, work around the edges or whatever. And it was like warm because his hands were just so big, and he's just like he's a hot guy. There you go. So anyway, he got into it because he was helping me with those. And so he wanted to make his own dragon, and he's going to make a dragon with tiny wings. So these are his wings. We made these just the other night. He hasn't trimmed them up yet. He wants to trim the outside here. And we just made these with wool that I had in my stash. I love the way these turns out. So they have a little bit of silk blended onto the front part for an embellishment, and they have the same kind of armature, but just a lot smaller. So they're still collapsible. They can still do all the things that the bigger wings can do, but they're just a little version of them. And so he's going to make a full-size dragon with little mini wings, which is so adorable. So yeah, we've been working on wet felting and armatures and all that stuff. And for those of you who have been following my 2-dimensional felting journey, I am working on a new project. This has been a long time coming. I did the needle felting of this like months and months ago, and then I've just not had a lot of time because the semester's been crazy. but I finally wet felted this. So this is going to be the background so that then I can needle felt more on top of it. So this is inspired by a picture that Spencer took of Tink in the long grass when she was a puppy. And so when it's actually finished, I'll show you, I'll put both on here so you can see the two pictures. But when this is finished, hopefully I'll create a little felted version of Tink in the foreground here with lots of different grasses all around her. Yeah, so it's just been fun to like experiment with the wet felting and the needle felting, like these projects that combine both, in case anyone's interested. The needle felting, I've talked about that on here before. It doesn't take too much to get into. If you have wool lying around, and most of you do, you basically just need a couple of needles, you know, these needle felting needles, and you know, one of these foam backers so you can work in 2 dimensions at least. And it's, you know, it's not like there's not a huge curve in terms of getting a lot of supplies. So you can make the basics with just like 1 needle, a foam pad, and some wool and some wool backing, right? These are all things that you can pick up pretty easily. If you're going to get into this stuff, the 3-dimensional wings and armatures and whatnot, it takes a little more supply. You know, you need to get your wires and all your stuff. But it's not that much. It's kind of fun. And it's, for me, I'll say this at the end of this episode, like I really do love working with wool in multiple ways. So it's one thing to knit with wool and to think about the properties of your yarn and how it's working out. It's another to card it up and wash it and interact with it in that way. And then it's another to wet felt it and to needle felt it. It's just, it's one of those materials that I absolutely love because you can just do so many things with it in so many different ways. And there's so many different properties that come out and are important to different kinds of crafts and practical things that we want to do. So anyway, I'm waxing poetic about wool because I love it. Let's get to the giveaway. So as some of you might remember, we have some relatively new yarn in the shop. This is Pict Wool out of New Hampshire. It is a fleece to yarn mill, and they do a bunch of different blends, especially with, they're working with closely with some of the independent producers who are around them in New Hampshire and New England. So lots of different breeds in these wool. So for example, this one is Romney, and it is in the color Polished Silver, which is just a natural blend. It's a worsted yarn, really beautiful. Then we have some different kinds. We have Hancock Brew 2, and we have the Hancock Brew actually in a couple different colors. We have 3 different colors. A kind of beautiful silver, a little bit of a brown, and almost like a very chocolatey brown or a black. And anyway, go check out the Pict Wool that we have on the Flock Farm Yarn Shop. I knit up a couple of samples. I talked about this in a previous episode. It knits up beautifully. It's just, these are worsted yarns. So it's unusual actually to find a, you know, worsted mill like this. Usually you get like a semi-woolen or semi-worsted or a woolen mill, but this is a worsted mill. So all of those fibers are aligned going in the same direction. So it's a denser, heavier yarn, really perfect for things like accessories, you know, a pair of mittens, which is what I'm gonna knit, hats, scarves, things like that. It has a nice weight to it. It's just a really beautiful, dense yarn that's from like local producers. This is what we do. This is what we love. So if you are like me, you know we love this kind of stuff. So for our giveaway, Belle has sent some samples, and what we're going to do is give away this beautiful skein of yarn. This is the Pict Wool Hancock Brew 2. It is a hand-sorted Jacob wool raised and milled in New Hampshire, and it is a 3-ply DK weight, 213 yards for almost 4 ounces. Beautiful. Almost like a, let's see if you can get it. It's like a silver brown. I'm not sure if we're going to get the right color in here. I'm going to hold it in a bunch of different places so you can kind of see it. Beautiful skein of yarn from Pict Wool. We're going to do that as our giveaway. To enter to win this, leave me a comment below. And Belle and I have been talking about what kinds of breed-specific yarn or breed-specific blends that you all would be interested in seeing coming out of Pict Wool Mill. So leave us a comment. Let us know which breeds you'd like to see, and I will pick one person to win this skein of yarn and send it off to you in a couple of weeks. So you'll have a couple of weeks to leave a comment, and then we'll see who wins the yarn. All right. Details are all below in terms of shipping and things like that. But yeah, good luck. Have fun entering. Think about all your different breeds, and we can let Belle know what they might be maybe making next over at Pict Wool Mill. So yeah, and check out their wool in the shop. Beautiful yarn over in the Flock Farm Yarn Shop at knittingthestash.com. So I hope that was enough wool for you in today's episode. All the ways that wool can go. I will leave links to everything in the show notes. So if you're interested in the homemade drum carder, in Pict Wool's website and the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, where you can pick up some of their yarn, the felting class, all of the stuff I will leave in the show notes. And I want to say a special thanks to the podcast producers, and that is Lenore, Jennifer, Erica, Nargis, Kendra, and Rose. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. If you're interested, you can head over to Patreon, or you can send me a coffee. Fun stuff. All right, I will see you in a couple of weeks. I hope everybody has a good time knitting and working with wool. See you later.